As I said, you want to evaluate how reliable the sources you find are. One of these things is the author. What are their credentials, their expertise? What have they written before? All of this will help you figure out if they are a reputable source of information to start with. You also might pay attention to the context and layout of the article. Look at the introduction, the table of contents, and the index if there is one. Does it actually spend a decent amount of time talking about this topic you want to discuss? Don't waste your time reading articles that are not relevant to your own particular topic and project. And also think about who is the audience for this project or for this article. What kind of vocabulary do they use? Do they use a lot of jargon or vocabulary that is specific to a particular field like medicine? What kind of style do they use? Is it too informal for the type of project that you are working on? All of this can help you figure out if it is appropriate for both the level and type of project that you are doing. As you are reading through your research materials, you also want to look at them critically. So read them thoroughly, take time to do this, and think about what's actually being discussed in the article itself. Consider, why does this matter? Who cares about this material? What evidence does the author have to say about this topic, and how do they prove that their point is true? How does one author's opinion on the topic differ from another's? It's good to have different perspectives, but also consider what types of evidence they are using to support their points. You can continue this process on and on for a very long time as you evaluate your sources. Now that you have several sources, you have evaluated them and decided that they are reliable, you can start to include them in your paper. As you are thinking about your essay itself, you want to consider that you are entering a conversation about this topic that is already ongoing. You want to consider how you are going to include the evidence that you have found into your own conversation about the topic. Remember, your own ideas need to be part of this paper as well, and not just a string of information from sources. You can think about the organization of the paper itself, as some of the research will be background information. So that might just be introducing the reader to the conversation itself and what people have said previously or historically on the topic, which may be included in an introduction or near the introduction of the paper. Some instructors may ask you to write a literature review where you synthesize the different elements of the topic in its own section. Other sources may be part of the analysis or argument that you are making throughout the paper and included in different sections of the essay. Within the paragraphs themselves, you always want to make sure to tell your reader how you're engaging with a source, either at the sentence level with attributive tags like who is talking according to such and such source, or through topic sentences that explain the point you are ultimately trying to make with this evidence. You always want to surround the evidence with writing in your own words, introducing what you're discussing, and then explaining how the evidence connects to your points. When you include information from the sources in your paper, you have three options. One is to quote, so use the direct words from the source. The second is to paraphrase or take a small section from the original source and put it into your own words. And the third option is to summarize large portions of information from the original source into a much smaller description in your own words. We'll get into each of these in a little bit more detail here. As you probably already know, quotations are direct words, phrases, or sentences from the source material. These are always put in quotation marks to indicate that they are the exact words the original source used. We suggest that you use quotes sparingly. Try to only use them when the author makes a point in a very clear and concise way that may be difficult to rephrase in your own language, or it's a very argumentative point and you want to get across that they are the ones with the strong opinion. You do not want to have a paper that is just quote after quote after quote, though. So be careful that you do not overuse quotes throughout an essay. Quotes always require citations in whatever style your professor requires for this paper. That may be APA, MLA, the Chicago Manual style, or another. Like I said, we don't want to overuse quotes, so how else can you include information from the source without quoting? Your most common other way is to paraphrase. So this is when you restate something from the original source in your own words. It's a little bit trickier than it sounds because you have to be very careful that you have completely reworded the statement into your own words, and except for key terms like names or places, you should be using completely different wording. The advantage of paraphrasing is that it is useful when the language of the original source is dense or unclear, and it helps you demonstrate a concrete grasp of the source material to your audience. One thing to be very careful of is that even while paraphrasing, you need to include an in-text citation. So whether the information is in their words or your words, since the idea comes from the source, you still have to cite it when you use it in the paragraph. Your last option is to summarize. The difference between paraphrasing and summarizing is that paraphrasing usually takes a short phrase and makes it into an additional phrase about the same length in your own words. Summarizing is taking something quite long and making it much shorter in your own words. So it's a brief recap of the argument of an entire source or an entire section of a source into your own words. A summary of another source may include reference to the thesis statement and/or hypotheses, as well as conclusions, but likely does not include specific data or examples. Like all of the other types of information, summaries still require a citation. So the biggest thing to remember is that anytime you use information from a source, you include a citation as well. Which style you use, again, will depend on your instructor or the field, and some particular styles prefer more of one type of referencing, like paraphrasing, versus another, like quoting. As we get towards the end of this presentation, we want to remind you that when writing a research paper, you are allowing the resources you have found to interact with your own points and ideas about the topic. You, as the writer, are becoming part of the scholarly conversation. One of the goals of academic writing is the unique analysis that you will provide on the topic. Part of this is including your thesis statement. Your thesis statement is the core contribution to the conversation. It should frame your prior knowledge, your research, and your personal critique of the topic, and this may depend on your particular audience. Hopefully, your research inspires the conversation to continue in your readers. As our last point, we want to remind you that good research requires time, attention, and dedication to your project and your thesis. One of the most difficult parts of research is just that it takes a lot of time. So give yourself the time to do this and also be open to change. It is okay for your ideas to change and develop as you work and adapt your thesis, your topic, and even your evidence as you go along. Thank you for your time, and if you have any questions or want to work on your research paper with us, please schedule an appointment at the Writing Center. We are happy to help.